What happens when collectors don't just follow the watch world, but they start defining it? That question is the question that frames this conversation with Halim Trujillo, founder of Watch Collecting Lifestyle. Halim represents a shift in how horology is experienced, is documented, and ultimately understood. Unlike traditional watch media, his platform emerged from the collector community itself. Not focused only on specifications or market analysis, but on something more immersive, the experience of collecting, the relationship between the collectors and the watchmakers, and the broader culture that surrounds high-end horology. In this episode, we explore how that perspective reshapes influence, how platforms like Watch Collecting Lifestyle sit at the intersection of collectors, brands, and of independent makers, documenting by also quietly shaping what becomes desirable and respected. We talk about independent watchmaking, why collectors have increasingly gravitated towards smaller, more personal brands, for example, and how direct access to manufacturers, to creators, to stories has changed the structure of the industry itself. We also look at the role of media, what separates journalists from influencers, curators, and collectors today, and how digital platforms have created a global ecosystem where legitimacy is no longer defined solely by institutions, but by communities and shared experiences. This episode is about proximity, about access, and about how the act of experiencing watches, not just analyzing them, becomes a form of influence. So stay with us, because in modern horology, those who live the culture increasingly shape it. All right, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Watches and Politics, where I have the utmost pleasure to speak with my longtime friend, Halim Trujillo, who is in the lifestyle and in the watch industry for a long time, being a reference for many of us who want to learn more about the industry and about the trends and everything. Halim, it's such a pleasure to be speaking to you. Welcome to Watches and Politics.
Ed, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me on board. I love that we have this relationship now for several years. I've been doing watch collecting lifestyle now for 13 years, and I look back and I just still can't believe that it's been that long. So thank you so much
Amazing.
for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming here. But before everything else, there is one question that I'm curious to ask every guest, and I'm curious about your answer as well. So, writing so much about lifestyle and watches and everything, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear watches and politics?
That's a great question. And it's something that when you launched this podcast, I always thought that there was a little bit of a political agenda that had to do with actual politics, either on a global scale or in the US. But I feel that it's more what comes to mind now that I've been like listening to other episodes. It's probably more about the politics that are like in the industry as collectors, as brands, and how we all gathered together to have a conversation about watches. At least that's what I grasp from.
Well, everybody has a different thing that comes to their mind, and that is why I love to ask this question. And definitely what you've been talking, what you just said, that's something that I've been trying to understand as well. But now let's go back to watch collecting lifestyle, and you created watch collecting lifestyle from the perspective of a collector rather than a traditional journalist, because you yourself said that you were a collector first as well. So tell us what motivated you to start this platform in the first place.
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey because when I created Watch Collecting Lifestyle back in 2013, I had the idea of putting together a publication that would appeal to collectors like myself and some of my friends. At the time, digital media revolving around watches was not as readily available as it is today. We had just a few publications that were available. In the US, it was pretty much Hodinkee and a block to watch. Then you had Fratello, Monochrome Watches was starting. And I feel that none of those publications really appealed to me where I was as a collector. And I decided to do an intersection where watches meets luxury and other things that are part of our daily lives as watch collectors. So I felt that there was room for a publication of this kind where I would bring other things into the picture, a little bit of travel, talk about cigars, the things that I'm passionate about more than anything, rather than just creating these other verticals that a lot of publications now try to talk about. It was like the things that I love, the things that my friends that are watch collectors love, and how we can bring those things into the picture, combining them with the watches that will always be the most important part of the content that I decided to create. So that's exactly how it came to life.
So basically, you wanted to bring together lifestyle, something that you love, and watches. And it's the same for me. I wanted to bring together politics and watches, two of my passions, and talk about that.
I know, and I think that's what makes some of our publications so interesting and unique, because I talk obviously with the perspective of a collector first. Then I put my hat as someone that I call myself a sybarite, where I enjoy the finer things in life. And then I put my hat as a journalist. And then, you get all those three together, and that's why I do what I do.
And the magic happens. But in all this experience, and even before as a collector, how do you see the role of collectors evolving in shaping the watch industry today? Or do you see any role of the collectors in
Yeah.
shaping the watch industry world?
Yeah. I think it's been, 13 years where I've seen many things evolve in the industry. I feel that me as a collector, I've also evolved into a different way of collecting. When I started watch collecting lifestyle in 2013, I had already been collecting for 23 years. So I started collecting in
Hmm.
1990. I, of course, started like everyone else, especially back in the days. You would start with Rolex, then you would start adding other brands. I remember I was fascinated with Omega as well, with Breitling. Then I discovered Audemars Piguet, and that's when things really shifted. And that was back in 1998. So it was early on before anyone could recognize a Royal Oak on my wrist. And I think that at that time, that's when I started looking for other things rather than just like a timepiece, right? I was looking for icons. I was looking for brands that would mean a lot to me. My connection with the Royal Oak is very interesting because the Royal Oak was born the same year that I was born in 1972. I
Well,
immediately felt a connection with it because of that. It was very exclusive. You would not see a Royal Oak on the wrist of anyone. I could like travel a whole year around different places around the world and I would not see one. And I think that at that point, as a collector, I started evolving. But what I've seen with collectors nowadays, when I started, watch collecting lifestyle, collectors were playing a very important role already by having these relationships with the brands and by attending get-togethers like the Red Bar crew. They've done a fantastic job at bringing people together with different chapters. But I feel that once Instagram really took off really, really hard, that's when collectors took a main role within the picture. They started creating content. I think that the number of consumer generated content, number of accounts on Instagram has just exploded to the point where everyone is now an influencer, or everyone wants to call themselves an influencer. But I feel that those that are true to the passion of collecting because of the horological aspect and the importance of timekeeping, those guys, we know who they are, guys like yourself, and I can name dozen of these accounts of collectors that are friends of mine that have been doing this just because they love horology, they love watchmaking, rather than just because they want to flex or they want to monetize their content. But I feel that collectors today have taken a very important role in what's being done in the industry. I feel that a lot of the brands maintain and foster a very close connection with collectors. A perfect example is Gisele Kut, and that's how you and I met, right? At the end of the day,
Yes.
was at a Gisele Kut event. And also, Gisele Kut is a very important brand, not only because they're the watchmaker of watchmakers, but in my own personal story, while I started buying Gisele Kut at a later time in my collecting journey, when I launched Watch Collecting Lifestyle, the first brand to reach out to me and say, "Hey, we like what you're doing. We would love to work with you," was Gisele Kut. So, it's
Amazing.
interesting how Gisele Kut comes into the picture as I am doing Watch Collecting Lifestyle, and also as I meet you. So I think that, yeah, the collectors are playing a very important role, and it's good that some brands really care about what collectors are saying out there, brands that listen to what collectors want.
Hmm.
And then we have
Hmm.
brands like Audemars Piguet, right, that they really don't care what collectors like.
So, Halim, I my podcast is not about the current events or the current trends. It's about the politics of the trending on everything. But I just feel that because you write about lifestyle and everything, we must address the elephant in the room. You talked your collecting journey and how Royal Oak is an important piece in your collecting journey. And then you're talking about all the influence that collectors have for these big brands. You're talking about how we met. So maybe this is a collaboration between us as well, this podcast. So, what about the Royal Oak Pop? What do you think about collaborations like that? And
Well,
was that a product that was influenced by collectors?
absolutely not. I think that, I wrote 3 editorials about this collaboration. And I've been very vocal about the evolution of Audemars Piguet over the last 5 years. I think that I'm probably the only publication that decides to call a spade a spade. I always do it in a very respectful way. But I do say things the way I see them, right? I started collecting the brand in 1998. I am a voice in the industry now. So I think that I have fair credentials to pass an opinion on the brand. And what I've seen with Audemars Piguet is just an explosion of the brand wanting to become more readily available instead of being the brand of the if you know, you know. And I think that this
Hmm.
particular collaboration comes at a very interesting point in the industry. I think that they've already had exhausted all the potential for collaborations that could erode the brand equity to a certain extent, the Black Panther, the Spider-Man cause. And I feel that this particular collaboration, when I first heard about it, I thought that it was going to be maybe an acquisition by the Swatch Group, and this was going to be exactly how they were going to communicate the acquisition of Audemars Piguet. There's been some rumblings and rumors about the brand being out there looking for someone to take over as a group, and a lot of people at one point said that maybe LVMH would do it or perhaps
Hmm.
Richmond. But I initially really thought that it had to do with an acquisition more than a collaboration like it is today. I feel that when you have a brand with such pedigree, with such rich history, you have to be very careful who you associate with. I think that the disruption that they've created, of course, it's there. The conversations everywhere on Instagram, through digital media, they're there. This is a lot of free media exposure for them at the end of the day, right? Because they created such a disruption that everyone is talking about it. I mean, you and I are talking about it right now. But I do
Yep.
feel that it's a collaboration that has no room in what they were doing and where the brand is going. I feel that when Swatch released the Moon Swatch, that made sense. That is a way of bringing in a brand within your group that you make sure that people aspire to own at certain point. It was the way where Swatch Group would start fostering those younger, collectors and people that were probably not that interested in watches to say, hey, today you can buy a Moon Swatch because you can afford it, but I'm going to make sure that when you have the money to buy your first luxury watch, $5,000, $6,000, you're going to go into a Speedmaster rather than going into a Rolex or another brand. I feel that
Mhm.
Blancpain needed a little bit of, awareness. And, when they released the scuba one, he was also brilliant. At least it made the 50 fathoms a little bit more, visible, to call it
Yep.
somehow. But I feel that this collaboration between a holding group like Swatch Group and Audemars Piguet, literally, it makes no sense to me. Bringing a pocket watch that can be worn in a pendant also seems totally out of place for what the world calls for today, right? I mean, we just came back from Watches and Wonders. We saw these incredible timepieces from almost every maison had incredible launches, right? And now you come create this disruption with a bioceramic watch, which is pretty much a heavy plastic. And, you put your brand there, you create these like really interesting, color combinations. But then there's the missing part, the missing link. How do I wear this on my wrist? Will I be able to wear this on my wrist? Right. And, it was a very premeditated approach. I believe that there's a line of accessories that will follow. And maybe that was something that was going to be made available right away. And then probably with all the noise and all the conversations that are taking place on Instagram, they held back and they're like, okay, maybe we'll release this at a later point and see how this goes. But that's how I feel about it. I honestly, when I wrote my first editorial, I did it from the perspective of a big Audemars Piguet collector. I've owned, no less than 50 watches combining the Royal Oak and Royal Oak Offshore at different times. And I feel that with this, I felt that it was a time for me to say, well, to me, honestly, the Royal Oak is not what it used to be. And, to me, it's dead, you know.
So for me, um, and I would love to have someone from AP on my podcast, which I know they won't come to my podcast. They are very um, uh, protective of their image and everything. But
Able
I
to do
would
a collaboration,
love.
right?
Maybe. I don't know. So the idea is I would love to have somebody from AP, if I could, to ask questions and to learn more of this collaboration. Because by nature, I want to understand rather than, of course, as everybody they have their own judgment. I do too. But what I'm curious is what were the conversations in the decision-making process? Like, for example, who dared to bring this idea first on the table to the board or to the C-level, and what that conversation is when the gossip started going around in WhatsApp groups. And as you well know, we the watch nerds, we are very gossipy. We don't have better things to do, I guess. So we talk about everything. My answer was, well, I still think this is a gossip. I don't think AP and Swatch are going to do such a collab. Maybe I was wishing for that not to happen, but I was like, I'm almost sure that this is not going to happen, but always had this thing that, okay, I can be proven wrong. I was proven wrong. However, I personally, as a vintage watch collector, and I love pocket watches and travel watches. I love that this pocket watch is a travel watch. What's missing is maybe an alarm. So when you put it on the table, let's say you're traveling, you can have, some kind of that playfulness. However, one thing is I still don't understand the background of AP behind it. Maybe, it's just I don't see that. And maybe, the AP is gonna prove us wrong later. But for collaborations in general, what is, for example, a very good interpreted collaboration in your opinion?
I think that collaborations that are based on the DNA of a brand, whether it's the design cues, the way the product's being presented to collectors, like for instance, collaborations that Breitling used to do with the flying squadrons, like the
Okay.
Patrouille Suisse, the Frecce Tricolore from Italy, or collaborations that Bell and Ross has done, where there is an element that brings that partner into the picture that makes sense. Like, for instance, today, Breitling has deviated from that and has launched a collaboration with the NFL where you have all these chronomats, that are themed after the colors of the different NFL teams. I feel that that's a collaboration that it's totally out of place. Yes, you want to sell watches. Yes, you want to capitalize and you want to make sure that you bring new people into the category, but you have to do it in a way where it's intelligent. When
Yeah.
it makes I feel that Tag Heuer makes sense with racing. They've always been associated, you know, to racing. So having Ayrton Senna, one of the most iconic Formula One drivers, as part of the lineup of some of their chronographs makes sense. Bell and Ross just released a new watch yesterday with the French flying squadron, the Patrouille de France, and I think that that's a fantastic collaboration. Why? Because their watches are themed around aviation, around the cockpits. But I feel that when there is a collaboration that makes no sense, feels not only disjointed, but feels forced. If I think about one of those collaborations, of course, one of the first watches that comes to mind is the Hublot Big Bang Nespresso. I mean, just creating a case out of old Nespresso capsules seems like a very forced use of a new material, trying to work as a material lab. But then you come and bring Nespresso, which, yeah, I mean, it's a Swiss company. I understand that part, but it has nothing to do with the watch. And I feel that those are the collaborations. I think that they're just forced rather than seamless.
I actually agree with you. And sometimes there are these collaborations that also touch an emotion in your body. And one of them is also, for me personally, is Ulus Narden that did a collaboration with One More Wave, which is this organization in San Francisco that helps injured veterans to get back into what they love in San Francisco,
Yeah,
that is
it's
like
like
surfing.
perfect.
But also it's a watch, so it's good for surfing. It's a light watch, and it makes a lot of sense. But you mentioned the Watches and Wonders. We just came out of that. We just left behind the 2026 Watches and Wonders. What did you expect? What did you find curious? I have my own opinion, but I want you to go first.
I think it was a fantastic addition. I feel that bringing more brands into the picture, felt a little exhausting for us journalists with so many appointments, but I think it was good. I think it was good to bring some brands that have been, absent. I think
Mhm.
that the numbers, I mean, speak for themselves, right? I mean, the attendance was way above probably what everyone was expecting. I mean, 25,000 public tickets sold. I mean, that's a huge number if you think about an industry that it's so sheltered, that it's so niche to really put things in perspective. And then the fact that you had 60,000 unique visitors there, then you had like thousands of journalists that were there. But I think that what I like the most is that I feel like all the brands really did a good job at coming up with new releases. I think that we all have our favorites. We all know which ones were the watches that we couldn't think, like we couldn't stop thinking about. And I think that in my case, my short list includes a little bit of everything. I absolutely loved, of course, the Vacheron Constantin, overseas ultra thin in platinum. I mean, that piece was to me the star of the show, not only because of what it represents for the brand, designing a new caliber and coming up with such a great looking watch, right? Where you still can have that playfulness of the different straps to go from bracelet to rubber to leather. The cardinal points was incredible. I absolutely love the Ulysse Nardin, Super Freak. I mean,
For
that
freak.
watch out not like it. I mean, and you have that like such elevated movement that it's the star of, the watch itself and all the moving parts that are on that like carousel with even the revolving, running seconds. I think that was incredible. Lange, couple home runs there for sure. I've always liked the Lumen. I think that I typically gravitate to watches that are a little bit more sporty than dressy, but I feel that the Lumen, it's a great way to make that watch sporty. And I think
Mhm.
that the Lange 1 Tourbillon Perpetual Calendar was just a fantastic example of how Lange can do things really well. Rolex, I think that the releases were really good. I feel that maybe people were expecting a little bit more and something a little bit more impressive. But I mean, Dages with the green umber dial is one of my favorite pieces from Rolex this year. Armin Strom minute repeater, Sonance 1259. I think it's brilliant because nobody has a minute repeater where you can have the longest number of chimes of any time, which is 1259, on demand, right? You have a selector where you can just have it chime the actual time or give you the 1259 that everyone just loves to listen to when it
Loves.
comes. Yeah, I mean, the repeater, I think Patek had some incredible releases. Parmigiani, they keep just pushing the needle more and more. And I absolutely love the Mystery chronograph. You know, when those hands come to start like keeping track of the elapsed time and then they hide underneath the other ones, it's just out of this world. And IWC as well. I think that I'm a fan of the engineers. So for me, whenever they bring stuff that is engineer based, I just love it. You know, I think that in all the sense of the word, I'm a huge fan of Genta, and that's another one of his amazing creations. And Eugene could. I mean, you know, the Master Control Chronometre Perpetual Calendar, fantastic piece, especially the rose gold one. So I think that all the brands really did a good job. You know, I think even Tudor with the Monarch going into a little bit of a different, you know, type of watch where it's a slightly dressy, you have a display case back, you have a beautiful salmon dial. I think that everyone really like just hit it out of the park. Piaget bringing the stone dials into the picture of the Polo 79. I don't know. I just enjoyed this edition of Watches and Wonders a lot. And of course, independents, they keep pushing the envelope. And I love that.
I love the new releases, almost all of them. For me, though, this year was a little bit more conservative, at least than the last year, because last year was, I don't know, like the brands felt that they needed to show a lot. So last year it was more liberal. This year it was a little bit more, I'm sorry, conservative for my taste. But those that you mentioned, you know, they were great. I would add Zenith, GFJ, Caliber, but I also think that this year many brands decided to do partial releases at Watches and Wonders, and I personally am expecting that maybe during the year we will have some releases from brands. I believe that the watch industry is still strong and it's going on. So let's see what they have next from us. You mentioned independent watchmakers, and one of the things that I saw this year at Watches and Wonders is that there were so many visitors and collectors that actually didn't come to Pal Expo and they went only to independent watchmakers. So, in your opinion, independent watchmaking, why do you think collectors have become so passionate about independent brands? Because lately we have seen independent watchmakers gaining traction, which makes me happy.
I think it has to do with the fact that not only you have very unique looking timepieces from most of the independents, but you also have a higher exclusivity where their production numbers are so low that it's nice that you don't see the watch you're wearing everywhere, right? I think that many season collectors have gotten tired of seeing the watch they're wearing everywhere. It
Mhm.
also brings a different level of craftsmanship, especially finishing. I think that when you are making, let's say, 100 to 500 watches a year, you can be even more meticulous about the way you do hand finishing.
Mhm.
I feel that there are some of these independent brands that have been recently hyped up by some collectors, by some dealers disguised as collectors. But I do feel that independent watchmaking also brings an offering that allows you to feel like you are really supporting the trade, where you are supporting brands that have been launched by the actual watchmaker that created those designs, by the constructor of those designs. And I think that that makes it highly appealing. I don't think that independent watches are for everyone. I think that you have to have some level of understanding of high horology, of course, the disposable income to be able to go in them, because the barrier of entry is much higher. I mean, you cannot go
Mhm.
buy a good independent brand for less than $30,000. Think about people putting money into a watch that barely anyone might recognize and have to spend at least 30 grand or more. You know, it's because you appreciate horology and because you really want to wear something that others don't.
You've you've also visited a lot of like manufacturers, you've written about them, you've visited a lot of like brands and HQs and independent watch brands and watchmakers as well. What do you make of the relation between the collectors and the creators or the makers?
I think that there is a very close relationship between the collectors and the creators, in a way where sometimes feedback and input is given to the brand directly by these collectors. I think I have a great
Hmm.
example of that. When I created my Armin Strom unique piece, we're going back to 2016, I wanted to create a watch that would blend in different materials, which is something that the brand was not doing at the time.
Hmm.
They had different materials based on different elements. The earth was a PVD stainless steel case. Then they had air, which was a titanium case. Fire was rose gold. And then they had water, which was a highly polished stainless steel case. And at that time, I had the conversation about creating a unique piece, and I wanted to mix materials. I wanted to have certain elements. And when they created this watch, actually, that fueled the idea behind a concept that they released the following year called the Armin Strong Configurator, which allowed collectors to choose different components and do bespoke watches,
Hmm.
similar to what Vacheron Constantin had done with the Tour de Lille, where you could pick the case, the dial. I don't think that it worked well for Armin Strom because there were too many options and that complicated the assembly of the watches. But I think that that conversation that I had with them is very similar to the conversations that are taking place on a regular basis between collectors and the independents. If you look at the majority of the independents that are meeting outside the Palexpo, at the Beau Rivage, at the Hotel de la
Hmm.
Paix, there's a lot of these like very close conversations taking place because the people presenting the watches, they're presenting it on a one-on-one basis, and they're also presenting it, you know, in such a proximity where you have the ability to have these conversations to say, hey, what if you guys did this or that? What if you
Hmm.
guys did this of different finishing? Or how about creating certain type of straps? So I think that there's a lot of input that comes from the collectors for independent watchmaking.
True. Also, that has been my experience where, especially independent watchmakers, they get those feedback at lunches, at dinners, and in one-on-one shows. But then also brands. I mean, brands now have all the tools in their hand to know who are the collectors that collect the brand and follow the brand and what do they think and even what do they write about it. That's what social media has helped. That's what WhatsApp groups have helped, and also collector dinners and all those kind of. This is the time when collectors maybe freely and very directly give that feedback to the brands, which makes another case of the difference between collectors and influencers. You know, influencers, maybe they are good to be able to put on a brand to their followers who are not into watches or watch collecting, but then it is the collectors who can give the true feedback to the brands or to the makers, because at the end of the day, they walk the talk. Now, I wanted to ask, what is the difference then between journalists, curators, influencers, and brand marketers when collectors have now all that power to have direct access to makers and brands?
I think that there is a very clear line and the difference between, journalists, collectors, influencers, marketeers. I feel that there is a common thread among some of them. Like in my case, I am a collector turned into a
Mhm,
journalist and I influence purchases, right? I have collectors that reach out to me and ask for my opinion or read my editorials and say, hey, what do you think if I buy this watch? Or do you
mhm,
think that I would like it? But I feel that the biggest, difference lies in whether you put your hard-earned money into these watches before you talk about them or not. I think that today anyone can be an influencer as long as you have a phone and a camera. You can create any type of content. You can talk all sorts of nonsense and just do clickbait or have people with tons of views. But I feel that when you put your money where your mouth is, which is buying the watches, then you can
mhm.
have a formed opinion, right? Then you can criticize whether the finishing on certain watch, you know, needs to be reworked or whether the finishing on brand X is incredible. I've been very vocal about some of these independents that have been hyped up in the past, for instance, Acrivia and Rexepi. And I had a collector that shared with me his story of picking up one of his watches from them. I photographed the watch and what I saw under the lens, I didn't like. I didn't like for a watch of that price, for a watch of that height with finishing that was not completed all the way to the edges of the main plate on the movement, to things of that caliber. And I think that a lot of times we see influencers that just continue to hype up brands when they have not even put money into buying any of these watches. They have not lost money on transactions when you buy a watch that maybe you should have not bought for that much and then you end up selling and you lose tens of thousands of dollars. But in my case, I think that I am lucky and blessed that I've been able to buy most of the watches that I've always wanted. And that's why I am vocal about it, because I've lost money on trades. I've lost money on watches that I sold earlier than I should have. A life full of regrets. When I started
Mhm.
buying my first APs back in 1998, there were no websites like we have today, right? The internet had just kind of started. The information that was out there, you would get from catalogs, a few books that had been published. And I didn't even know the importance of an AP at 6 o'clock or an AP at 12 o'clock. So I was trading these watches without even thinking about that. And I actually liked the AP at the top because it was more prominent. And I let go, several 5402s in steel that today would have been like above like the six-figure range. But I think that it's important that we start giving credit where credit's due, right? There's a lot of collectors out there that are very vocal, and we
Yep.
should take their opinions into consideration. Same with journalists that have put money into watches.
Mhm.
And we need to start being a little bit more selective about who of these new influencers that have come into the picture we listen to, we follow, we believe what they say, because a lot of it is just hype for views, for clicks. And I think that that is something that is not beneficial for the industry, but that actually hurts the industry.
And, I would add, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't even think that is beneficial for the brands themselves. And the brands are going to benefit from them. In many cases, there are many brands that I would say that even get hurt according to who they decide to collaborate when it comes to content and stuff like that. But when we're talking about brands, do you feel that there are particular watches or watch brands that remain underappreciated in the market today?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, for instance, Zenit is an incredible brand that I feel is relatively underappreciated. I think that they moved in the right direction. I think that back in the days when they released the Defy and they supersized the cases, they almost killed the brand and nobody was
Mm.
really buying Zenit anymore. And I think that now they've taken new direction. I think that they're doing things really well, but I think their watches are still very underappreciated. I mean, you go into listings on the secondary market and the watches are selling at, maybe 50 cents on the dollar, 45 cents on the dollar. And I think that a lot of people are just buying what allows them to make a profit or not lose money in the next
Hmm.
transaction. I feel that brands, like Breguet, for instance. I mean, Breguet is one of the greatest names in watchmaking, and people also do not appreciate it as they should. You can find Breguets at 20 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar. And I think that that's pretty sad, right? For
It
such
is.
a name, the inventor of the tourbillon, Phil Chopard as well, is very underappreciated. Ferdinand Berthoud, I mean, I feel that their awareness is kind of low, but I mean, make incredible watches. I mean, the Fusée
Of
chain
course.
mechanism they have, it's like out of this world.
It is. It is. And yeah, and we can add so many of those brands that today maybe they are known among the collectors, or like even older collectors, but then they don't get all that love. However, it's also good that some of the brands that you just mentioned, they are taking some good steps towards improving them, like Zenith, and I would argue that even Breguet with the new releases, they are doing something. I hope that that works for them, at least when the field is balanced a little bit.
Yeah, and to
Halim,
continue with this, like just for like a second,
of course.
I think the Gilles Cult, it's a brand that is very underappreciated. I think that their awareness level has increased drastically over the past couple of years, but I feel that you get so much watch, and you don't get that elsewhere.
Continue as a collector of Gel Lecoultre, even like for the vintages, I would say the same. Like it's amazing how those vintage watches, still work like a tank after so many years. I also agree that their awareness is increasing. I just hope they continue doing the right, taking the right steps, and then we can see that. But looking ahead, how do you think that collector culture will shape the future of horology?
That's a tough question. That you know, I can think of it in different ways. I feel that um, if we look at what's going on right now with Audemars Piguet, I mean, I think that certain collectors have pushed the brand to do what they're doing because it's all about the hype. It's all about, buying these super flashy watches, collaborations that make no sense. But I think that part of the problem is not only internally, but where collectors have started to take the brand. And I would say the newcomers into collecting the brand, right? So I feel
Hmm.
that when it comes to the industry itself, the more educated collectors are, the better things will go for the brands because brands are listening to collectors now. Now there are active conversations with collectors that before were not taking place. All these dinners, cocktails, events, activations where they invite their VIPs. That allows for the brand to connect at a more personal level with collectors. And in that those brands that have done the work at educating their base of clients and collectors are the ones that are really going to benefit of these relationships and what collectors have to say. I think that those that have just relied on, let's sell more watches, let's see what happens. And again, sadly, AP is one of those. They're just going to continue to take their ship in the direction that some of these collectors want to take it, whether it's for the benefit of the brand, whether it's for revenue, and who cares about, the brand equity that they built over 150 years. So I really think that collectors will continue to take that very important role in what's happening in the watch industry moving forward.
Let me ask directly, do you think there will be AP collectors that will be really uncomfortable with the latest collab that they will leave the brand? Do you think it can
There
go
are,
that far?
yeah. Yes, actually, this is something that has already started to happen. I would say when the Travis Scott collaboration was presented, a lot of my good friends that are big AP collectors starting selling their watches. They felt that they didn't like where the brand was going. Like I said it back then, it's the brand for the nouveau rich, right? A lot of these collectors that have owned AP for over a decade or let's say 15 years, they felt betrayed because what they liked was the exclusivity, the fake scarcity that was created by the brand during the pandemic, where allocations were not even given to those important collectors, started turning them away. And I think that with what's happening with the Swatch collaboration, has confirmed, that many of these collectors will continue to liquidate their watches. If we look at the market for the Relic offshore, pre-owned pieces, I mean, some of these incredible watches uh, that had been released in the late 90s, early 2000s are going for like $14,000, $15,000. Limited editions that were not selling under 25. And I think that we will not see the effect of this collaboration immediately. I think it's something that is going to build over the next 6 months when we see the pocket watches out there, how they're displayed, who is wearing them, how they're being worn. Of course, companies like Deluxe and other strap makers are already probably in the process of creating a conversion kit that would allow for you to have it on your wrist. And I think that, time will continue to confirm that the brand is going in a direction that continues to erode the brand equity that they have out of just, getting more revenue. I think that the conversation about them giving all these proceeds from the sales of the Swatch Royal Pub for watchmaking and preserving the trade is just an afterthought. I feel that it's just a way they can continue to control the conversation, make it appear as there's a goodwill behind, right? There's been a lot of collectors and some journalists that have been vocal about how they don't like this, including myself. And how else can I defend this? Well, we're going to donate all these proceeds for watchmaking, right? That sounds fantastic. And, in reality, it is fantastic if that was really the idea behind it. Had it been communicated since the beginning, it would have been received differently. But I do feel that we will see the real effect between 3 to 6 months once we see the watches out.
Well, as they say, live and learn. We're gonna we're gonna see that. Halim, I had such an amazing time with you that I didn't really
Like
understand how time has passed. But before I let you go, I want to define something that we keep talking about, and that is collectors. So, Halim, what is a collector for you?
a collector for me is someone that appreciates an object, puts time, effort, and money into finding that object and getting the best example of that object to preserve, to keep, and maintain. You can collect pens, you can collect watches, you know, you can name all sorts of objects. I mean, I can show you in this office all the things that I collect or some of them, but I feel that collecting goes beyond just buying and selling. It's the chase. It's that dopamine release when you get the object that you have been wanting to get for a while. And then once that dopamine release is gone, that's when you go look for the next one and the next one. And it becomes a little bit of an addiction. So that is what collecting to me is. I think that that's why I chose the name, for the website as Watch Collecting Lifestyle, where I talk about watches, but, you know, the good life, all those great things that I love and I like to collect.
Well, that's amazing. And to that note, I want to thank you again for accepting to be on Watches and Politics.
My pleasure.
We want to build resources for educational purposes, for knowledge purpose. You have been an amazing and a pioneer to building those resources and writing about them, and being here in Watches and Politics, having this conversation has been such a pleasure. Thank you very much, Halim, again.
Like,
Appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for the time. And I'm honored to be, part of this conversation with you. Always a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you soon.